Baseline.
And I don't know when AI will get EQ. I don't know if AI will get EQ. Because EQ is very hard to codify.
The baseline is designed to create an emotional response.
I've seen things you won't believe.
More human than human.
Make you question everything.
Like my world of infrastructure, cloud, servers, compute, storage, networks, it's never overlapped into humanity. It's always been like components to build stuff to make things better. Airplanes safer, cars made quicker, you know what I mean?
It's kind of like an enabler under the hood.
Totally. Whereas AI is an enabler, but also
Does very front and center.
Does it replace people? Does it threaten humanity? Kind of thing. I don't know. What's your view?
Well, I will generally tend to fall somewhere in the middle. I'm more of a pragmatist than an idealist on either side. Right? I can see the dystopian risks to it. I generally am an optimist at heart, and I find that there is a utopian future. But kind of, if you look at all the major historical revolutions that have happened in the past, there was never anything that happened in a moment, in a month, in a year. Yeah, it is a few years of consistent change and consistent progress that then allows humanity to adapt to the new technology, right? Whether you think about the Luddites and you think about kind of the sewing mills, right? You think about the internet. You think about
the wheel.
Yeah, the wheel. You think about the car. All of these, right, have all had years of adoption to then get humanity to adapt to how to use it capably, and then have delivered substantial value. To a certain extent, I mean, I get your point, right? Cloud and infrastructure is kind of the hidden underlying foundation. If you think about it, cloud is also the enabler to AI, right? If we did not have the horsepower that cloud infrastructure provides, how could you do deep learning, right? And to the extent that we actually have that cloud compute available today, Gen AI is reaching its peak in terms of how much cloud infrastructure there is, how costly it is, right? You think about OpenAI and the billions. They're spending about $7 billion a year just in cloud compute costs, right? So you can see kind of like how much of an enabler cloud is. But then you think about just the journey to cloud, and that journey to cloud started getting talked about in the late 2000s, right? Some would say that it kind of really firmed up when Microsoft got parity with AWS and Google in terms of their cloud service, just about 2011, 2012. But even now, the move to cloud is front and center for a whole bunch of companies, right? So people are still moving to cloud today. People still see the advantage of cloud and are paving their path to cloud. And it just goes to show that, there is such a myriad of progression that you have with technology adoption, right? Some people will go at it right at the start, the whole Gartner kind of adoption curve, right? And value will always come when the majority is on there, right? And then in the context of AI, we're right at the start. We're right at the start.
So it's a great opportunity to Vaibs, actually. IFS, it's an amazing company that many people haven't heard of yet engage with on every trip, every travel, every transaction. There's probably some component of your genius and the team's intelligence in our lives. Maybe just give a little overview of how people could be engaging with your philosophies and ideas and products every day without actually knowing about it.
Yeah, it's interesting you ask it that way, because I was just sat with someone from Computer Weekly yesterday. It's a pretty popular kind of
Legacy
magazine.
media, Vaibs. It's all about podcasts now.
Completely agree. Which is why today's all about spending time with you.
Thank you.
Speaking to this gentleman, and IFS as a company has been around 40 years. We were born in the 80s, Swedish heritage. The first customer that IFS supported was a nuclear power station in Sweden. And the folklore is that we actually put a tent outside of that nuclear power station, and we built the software for that nuclear power station within that tent. Kind of goes to show the dedication, right, that we have. But I was reflecting with the gentleman, and one thing that you kind of stumble upon is that because we serve industries, so we're IFS is a very targeted company, right? We don't serve fintech, we don't serve fast-moving consumer. We were very selective about the industry sectors that we operate in: manufacturing, energy and resources, aerospace, defense manufacturing, telcos and service industries. And if you think about a whole majority of all of those, we have these customers that are long-standing customers whose names we just can't share, right? We can't share names of companies that are critical infrastructure for their country. We can't share names of armies or defense manufacturers, or even airlines will not allow us to share their names, right? So we're actually serving some of the biggest companies, some of the most prominent companies. If you're taking a plane, it's likely that that's maintained by our software, right? If you are speaking on your cell phone, then it's likely that the field workers within that company are scheduled by our software. If you are consuming goods, maybe machinery, maybe hardware, the hardware that you would use at home to fix stuff. All of that is manufactured by companies that use IFS to run their assets. So it is everywhere, and it's kind of in the background a little bit.
Well, this conversation is hugely exciting because you're absolutely right. IFS deliver, I would say, components to critical infrastructure globally, North America, Europe, certainly. And your insight on AI and how you adapt AI and leverage it and build it into your systems is happening all around us without necessarily being front and center on the news, but it's happening. So this conversation is a delight, really, because it kind of gives me a view of how you're thinking about not only traditional machine learning, but generative AI in these systems that are powering countries, armies, telcos, the population.
Absolutely. You hit on kind of a couple of triggers there, right? One is any technology, AI and different forms of AI, or just plain old software, right? Rules-based software. It only delivers value when it's used, and actually delivers optimal value when it's used as intended, right? And you have different disciplines within kind of the software engineering or software development paradigm, right? Design thinking, design-led development, that contribute to making sure that the return on investment on the software that you develop, including in this case AI, is actually maximized. Why? Because people use the software you put out and they use it as you intended it to be used. That, I think, is one of the biggest differentiators for how we're positioning AI and IFS.ai in our product, which is IFS Cloud, and the fact that it's completely embedded. So when you buy, we have the concept of solution sets, right? So if you're in manufacturing, you're going to buy the manufacturing solution set. If you're doing asset management in energy, you're going to procure the asset management solution set for oil and gas. When you buy a solution set, all of the AI features and use cases that we have, they come built in.
Let me just get beyond that, though. But if we look at the big general purpose large language model AIs, OpenAI, ChatGPT, which I feel are this general purpose movement towards this singularity where AI essentially is indistinguishable from human beings, potentially equal or greater intelligence than a human. There's this extremely triggering, exciting, frightening, terrifying, positive, utopian, dystopian situation where machines can essentially are undetectable from humans. And then there's the practical reality of AI on optimizing airplane engines, manufacturing operations. Maybe you could just try and explain how you see that. Is there a difference? Are they two separate things? Is it one thing? Where are you focused? What's the practical reality of what you're actually doing?
There's a fair few things that I could hit on there.
Yeah, totally. Just take your time.
Yeah, it's a bit of a dichotomy if you think about it. Yeah, you have these general purpose models, the foundation models as it were, right? And actually, you see even in the industry right now, the foundation models are the few, and those foundation models are then delivering smaller models, right? And the smaller models are more domain-oriented and specialized, but equally, they need to be smaller so they get better performance, right? Because you don't want to ask a question to Gen AI and then wait there for the answer to come. You want the latency to be low, right? So you're kind of you're hitting the laws of physics to go any bigger, and then you're having to also kind of start to get smaller also because the bigger you get, the more generalized you get. And that is the dichotomy here, right? Is that the more you become the everything for everyone, the less specialized you become, right? And before Gen AI came about, everything that you saw in terms of AI progress was when AI models were very purpose-built for very specific solutions, right? In fact, even now, if you think of where deep learning is really delivering material benefits, right? The Nobel Prize that the DeepMind engineers got from Google last year in chemistry, right? That is an example of AI which is very purpose-built, very specifically for the chemistry innovation that they delivered, right? I think it was comparing proteins, or I'm forgetting the specific breakthrough or innovation that they delivered, but that was a very good example of deep learning delivering, or AI based on deep learning delivering a very specific enhancement and a specific value because of that targeted model. Don't get me wrong, Gen AI, or make no mistake, Gen AI is also built in deep learning, right? But these large language models, the larger they get, they become more generalized, right? And you're seeing that with these large language models where you can actually expect physics oriented PhD level type responses from these large language models, which of course boasts the great encapsulation of all the knowledge they have been able to suck up, right, in terms of encodings and embeddings within the model. They'll still get second grade, third grade answers wrong, right? Which is very interesting if you think about it from a human perspective. The way we learn, we graduate, right? Our understanding. We build the foundations when we were young, and we then use those foundations to be able to expand and suck in more knowledge specific to different domains
So
as we go forward.
incrementally progressive. And I suppose as humans get passionate or excited or enjoy certain domains or areas, then they will naturally go deeper because the internal mechanisms of joy are happening as you're learning about things that you like.
Correct.
Which is the beauty of organic humanity, really, because not everybody wants to specialize in the same subject.
Correct.
Whereas AI seems to have been, and I've kind of rudely interrupted your train of thought, but it's kind of been dumped all this information. It's kind of starting. It hasn't earned its right. Have I misinterpreted them?
No, I think that you've not misinterpreted. It's a fundamentally different paradigm, right? I mean, we learn and evolve based on principles, based on foundational truths that we come to accept and that we then deduce the world based on top of as we go forward in life, right? And we then have the joy of actually looking at the same situation from two different perspectives because our experiential learning in the past, albeit with some similar foundations, allows us to perceive things differently. Whereas AI, and particularly if you look at large language models, what are large language models? They're effectively a very, very behemoth collection of embeddings. Yeah? Embeddings which are probabilities of what letter comes next, right? And which word comes next. And what you're doing is you're basically after having, I mean, if you look at it from a mathematical perspective, what large language models actually prove is the fact that there are certain patterns, there are laws to language that we have not codified yet. There are certain patterns within language that if you are able to train a machine model that can suck up so much information, right? I mean, ChatGPT, when it came out, was what, 3 billion parameters, trained on approximately kind of 3 billion articles, right? So if you have that kind of a mammoth corpus of data and you have such a big model, what we effectively stumbled upon or discovered is that it would produce human-like language, right? But cats go to Mars is a perfectly good enough English language statement. We then had to kind of reinforce into that ChatGPT model, which got released to the public, that actually cat goes to Mars is not a correct statement to make because that can't happen. And make no mistake, that wasn't ChatGPT realizing that by itself.
That's human
That was a
reinforcement
human
learning.
that was reinforcing that into the model. Now, we've of course found newer techniques and we've built on that foundation, right? So the next level of innovation has delivered the ability for you to do reinforcement learning from within the model, right? But you get the kind of the planetary difference between how humans learn versus what a large language model encapsulates. And there's probably two vectors and trajectories that I could take this towards, right? One is kind of, let's say, the persuasion around AGI.
I mean, AGI and ASI are, as far as I'm concerned, quite recent terms.
Correct.
That have emerged out of OpenAI, who have some form of contractual statement with Microsoft about when they reach AGI, they get out of this Microsoft. Now, this contract with Microsoft around access to the technology. AGI initially was about artificial general, which was the idea that you were achieving human level intellect. And now later I realized it was some sort of $100 billion revenue number. It's actually a financial number. So I don't even know, Vaibs, if AGI and ASI are real technology orientated terms or pseudo marketing terms.
I must say, like, if you ask me, what's the difference between artificial general intelligence and artificial superintelligence? I could give you an answer, but it's not kind of grounded on clear definitions that have been given to me. What I know is AGI as a term has been around for about a decade now, for 10 years, right? So when OpenAI started and GPT-1 came about, and GPT-1 was far, far behind 3.5, I think GPT-3 was when you started to, particularly kind of the insiders, particularly kind of Silicon Valley insiders, started to go like, okay, there's something here, right? We could start. We're a few years away, but we could start to make something
when
from
is
this.
2019, 2020?
This was been 2018, 2019. I think the pandemic kind of slowed it down or made it kind of go a bit more indoorsy, more kind of behind the scenes. I think it was even probably later, early 2020s, maybe. GPT-3.
I think it was 2017 where Google coined this whole "attention is all you need" document, which was around that idea of LLM. And
well, that was the transformer models, right?
The
So
GPT.
exactly.
The GPT,
So if you think about kind of the timeline, the big breakthrough that happened was at the start of the 2010s. So in about, I think 2012 is
earlier than the GPT.
Yeah, and that's when deep learning became a reality. So deep learning was the first foundational thing, and I think the deep learning network was called AlexNet, if I'm not mistaken. There's this famous kind of image recognition competition that used to happen on an annual basis. I think it still does, and there was a deep learning neural network that basically beat all the competitors, right? And by a significant margin. You're talking 15%. 15% less error rates. And that's when kind of the world took notice. I think the concept or the theory of deep learning was written down a fair few years before that even. It was always kind of touted as, theoretical. It's not gonna be real. That's when it became reality. And everybody who was anybody in the AI space that was trying to do anything with neural networks or traditional machine learning took a note of that. And then, it was all about bigger models, right? Because deep learning is effectively, you have neural networks which have multiple different layers. And then when you get into kind of, millions of parameters, which is effectively those nodes within a neural network, right? You then start to get into the kind of the deep learning domain, right?
When you come to the application of this in your clients and the people you speak to, how do you turn information into intelligence? That's my question. We talked about AI, you talk about deep learning, we talk about neural networks, which is a function of independent intellect, isn't it? It's the ability to kind of process information, bring in experiential knowledge, take in environmental, like kind of agentic AI, I suppose, environmental real-time data in your mind, and then you make a decision based, and you would say that's an intelligent decision, a decision based on intelligence. In a data system or a computer system, how do you turn information into intelligence?
It's
a big question.
Yeah. You can look at it in different ways, right? So, I mean, the traditional way to look at it is data, and data contextualizes information. Information contextualized is knowledge or insight, right? And then, knowledge translates to intelligence, and awareness and having knowledge of a situation translates to awareness. Now, you don't need AI for that, right? Software systems have been doing that for a very long time, right? They take raw data, they add metadata on top, which becomes information, and then that information is presented to you within the context of a workflow at the right time on a screen with all other bits and pieces of information in there, which gives the user knowledge, right? So that's kind of that workflow that we've been seeing in computer systems, which are effectively decision support systems, right? For a very long time. Now, AI is effectively capability therein to be able to do something much more advanced than just taking that information, joining it with other information, filtering it, sorting it, and showing it in a nice way on a screen, right? What AI is doing is actually applying very, very complex math and statistics to generate a very advanced insight, right? Now, what is a neural network? Actually, a neural network is effectively computations. It's mathematical computations, mathematical calculations, right? So what you're doing is you're saying, I have an input and an output, and within that input and output, I have layers, yeah? And I hope I had a piece of paper, I had drawn it for you, right? But basically within those layers, you're doing mathematical calculation, or statistical calculation, all math effectively. And then what you're saying is, I take this, I train it on data, and then once I've trained it on data, I've then encapsulated that into an AI model, which can be used in the real world. And in the real world, the best way to describe it is, for example, your Google Maps API, right? Google has a Maps API, very, very popular, very well used API. All it asks for is, give me the latitude and longitude. Those are your input variables. And then what it will give you as an output is the name, is the address, is the telephone number, is all kinds of social information. But those are those output variables, right? That's effectively what an AI model is. Once your AI model is trained, and when you've effectively promoted it to production, and you have people using it, what's called inference. Inference is effectively an API, right? It requests certain pieces of information, and then it gives back certain pieces of very advanced analytical insight. It's the same thing that OpenAI has done, right, with their OpenAI API, where it asks for a prompt, right, and then it gives you back an answer, right? It's an inference API. Now, the reality is that it is the advanced part of the advanced insight where AI generates a lot of value. And I think the doubling down on, particularly from our perspective, is not just generating the advanced insight, but generating it and embedding it within the experience so it's used, right? Because
In real time.
in real time.
So can you give me a few examples where you're seeing this work well? Or are we still in the early stages?
Do you mean from the industrial customers we serve, or just in general?
No, anything from your perspective. An IFS insight would be interesting. But I think what you've just encapsulated there, which I thought was very well articulated, it's this idea of taking a moment, taking a transaction, and supercharging it with intelligent insight or advice. So you're basically creating huge optimization and efficiency gains within each transaction, and over a macro, that's going to be huge. But bringing that to an actual practical.
Let me give you a consumer grade example, right? So I'll ask you, and I this might fail for a second, but it'll work when I get eventually to the end of the
Vaibs, fail away.
You use an iPhone, I see.
Yeah.
I'm sure you go through the day and you're inquisitive about certain topics, right? On average, how many times do you go and Google it on Safari versus ask that same question to ChatGPT?
Okay, right. I don't know what answer you want me to give, but what I would tell you is
The honest answer.
I don't use Google anymore.
Or ChatGPT.
I use pretty much all ChatGPT or Perplexity, ChatGPT. I use Google for maps. In terms of internet search, I would say 10% now. 10%,
Google.
yeah.
And 90%.
90% some form of generative AI interaction. And the reason why is, because I very simply, the idea that somehow Google then presents this paid for preference outcome, pages and pages of links, boring. And also it's like this moment in time transaction. The thing I like about the new generative AI, it's conversational, because usually the first question about something is really a first question in a set of questions, and each outcome will determine another question. So say, for example, come in here, I would be like, okay, is there a coffee shop on the way? Yes, there's these 3 coffee shops. Do they sell organic milk? I'm making up these examples, very middle-class examples. But I guess my point is that within the domain of a generative AI, I can progress through a set of interactions very quickly. Whereas an old school search, consume data, search for the opening times, it just feels so inefficient.
Yeah, no, I see what you mean. And inquisitive question, do you use ChatGPT, OpenAI's software, or do you use like Bing Chat or Bard or something like that?
OpenAI, ChatGPT or Perplexity are the two.
You will see, and I tend to kind of try all of these, right? You'll see a marked difference between the free use that you're given of, for example, Bing Chat versus the paid version of OpenAI, right? I mean, that's really where you get good at this game.
That's what I use paid
Yeah.
ChatGPT.
And like it or not, the reality is that you and I are, because I'm using generative AI 50% of my time, right?
I might be a bit more because I'm kind of like in this space.
Yeah.
And what I love, Vaibs, is the memory. The fact that a Google search, yes, you've got cookies and historical search. With ChatGPT or generative, you have a history and a context for each question.
Yeah.
Do you know? Which is just delightful.
That's the the memory, the way they tokenize your conversation, right?
Yeah.
Do you know under the hood what's happening there, by the way?
No, tell me.
Is when you ask the second question, you're basically getting the previous question, the response to the previous question, and your new question sent back as a combined prompt back to the LLM.
Interesting.
So it's mimicking memory, but really what's actually happening is there's just consuming more tokens. The more you have, why do you think that there was this particularly last year, and towards the end of 2023, there was this whole move around, I'm forgetting the technical term for it, but the token space, right? The amount of
Context window.
yeah, context window. There we go. And that context window was all about, how long a conversation you can have. Why? Because these conversations get long, and that context window was determined basically based on, the ability to actually combine the previous answers with your new question. Because every time you go back to the LLM, that's what you're having to do. Right?
Interesting.
Now, that aside, and personally, I use generative AI primarily for generating. So it's kind of like, if I wanted to write something creative, give me some inspiration, write something professional even. I mean, it's the perfect boilerplate, right? It's a boilerplate for anything. And then I take it and make it my own kind of, right? So I use that really, really well. What I find also is if I'm looking for general explanation on a topic, I'll first go to Gen AI and I'll ask it to define. But then I'll take that and I'll actually go into Google, because I like the ability to be able to pick and select which Medium article I'm going into, right? Or kind of which blog do I need to go into, right? And that gives me that innate confidence of choosing what I'm reading and why I'm trusting that information versus a bit of obscurity that happens when it comes from Gen AI to me, right? Even though it'll give me citations, the citation is not an actual quotation of that article, right? The citation is more of a, hey, I am telling you contextually the same thing as what this article is saying. It's not quoting that particular article, right? And
Google have kind of organically evolved into the primary, maybe 2 years ago, the primary portal to information and links. And they've monetized that through ad revenue, SEO prioritization. That's how that works, right? And relatively unencumbered by government, I would suggest. And when you think about it, I mean, I remember the very early days of Yahoo search. There was one with a black Labrador, and I can't remember that one.
yeah, Dogpile.
Was that like Ask Jeeves?
Yeah.
There was kind of a set of competitive engines. They went away, whether they were acquired, they were crushed commercially. Google, obviously Microsoft. A few have emerged. You look at the big LLM providers, and you look at this conversational. We're seeing, ChatGPT's engine reskinned by others. You're seeing, obviously, Google with Gemini are hugely accelerating development on theirs. Perplexity, I don't know what underlying LLM Perplexity use. I don't know whether they've got their own, or But are we going to end up in another one huge private organization leading this, or seeing what's happened with Stargate and Donald Trump taking $500 billion of public money to invest into AI infrastructure projects, $100 billion straight into Texas to build data centers? Are we going to see some sort of pseudo-private public entity owning this dominating generative AI interface for the population? I don't know how it's going to play out, but it could be interesting.
Yeah. I think that you're going to see the open source movement win out.
Really?
Yeah. I think that Gen AI as a capability is actually multifaceted, right? And you're seeing that, right? Was it Deepseek? The Chinese LLM, right? Completely open source. As good as O1. Yeah. O1, which is just a month ago, yeah? So the ability for the open source industry to come in and to catch up, and I think eventually will outpace, the private investment that's happening.
Even
To
the US public money investment.
to the extent that I think that the the private ones will start to conform and want to become more open source. That doesn't mean that there won't still be some closed source ones.
Oh, so they'll move away from a proprietary closed LLM to...
They'll open source their models, like just what Meta has done from day one, right? I mean, it.
I quite like Llama because of that. And like I've seen the recent, Zuckerberg, and he was there at the US inauguration. He's kind of like moving around politically. But actually, from a purist perspective of open sourcing Llama language model from early, I thought that was quite a brave and good move.
The right thing to do.
Yeah, I thought it was the right thing to do.
Exactly. And I genuinely think that as a capability, that the open source world is the answer eventually.
So does IFS leverage open source LLMs? Where are you in terms of
we use OpenAI today, but we're actively looking at Hugging Face, and not just for the underlying LLM, but Hugging Face is the de facto kind of pipeline, right, for Gen AI.
Yeah.
And then on that, we're going to be using different models, right? We're currently evaluating Deepseek. There's different kind of dimensions to it, right? We need to know that it's safe to use, and these big language models. I mean, yes, open source, great, but even the open source versions of it, you need to be able to know kind of what the heck is going on under the hood, right? Which doesn't only require deep specialization, of course it does. It also requires heavy compute power, right, for you to be able to really understand what's going on under the hood. So we are evaluating, but we've also gone with speed to market, right? Speed to market means we're not going to build our own LLM or foundation model. We're just using one from OpenAI. But what we're doing is we're applying all the contemporary techniques, right? You've heard of retrieval or augmented generation, for example, right? So RAG is a very, very good way to actually make the LLM extremely precise, right? And that's what we're using to make sure that the insights that we're giving to our industrial customers are right 100% of the time. You can't risk, a Gen AI model hallucinating in there, right? But okay, you think about then what a RAG is. It's basically an index. Exactly what search engines use.
The two points on that. First of all, for IFS and its clients, RAG seems like that natural technology that you've got the data, you trust the data. It's probably privately and securely wholly owned by the client, generated within the client, owned by the client, processed within a tight domain of intelligence. Some form of retrieval augmentation, intervectoring will be able to create unique insights for that customer. That RAG just makes so much sense to me. How then it presents that, what language it uses, what LLM it uses to front up the transaction. Well, that could be Llama, it could be
any
OpenAI.
foundation model.
I want to use the word pluggable in some ways.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So
but that is very much the case. I mean, if you think about it, yes, we've been using OpenAI, but we've gone from OpenAI's 3.5 to 4 to 4 Turbo.
You're plugging.
Next
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
So we're going from one LLM to another anyway, right? Now then we could move to an open source model tomorrow. And I mean, let's be honest, the best thing about going open source, I basically take my margin and keep it in my own house, right?
Or pass it to the customer.
Or pass it to the customer, exactly. Right? Make it cheaper, make it more accessible.
So, but if you look at what's just happened in the last 24 hours, this Executive Order 14110, which was this safe, secure, and trustworthy development of artificial intelligence.
And they've repealed that.
Has been repealed. So, and there are a number of components in there. One of them, I think, being the transparency of the data that was used as learning for the LLM. And I guess the human reinforcement process also should be transparent in terms of, okay, we started with this raw set of data. This was its origin. This is its, ownership. And then we did human reinforcement learning. These were the processes, these were the people. And this is this outcome that you use to generate content. The transparency of that feels right, especially around things like data sovereignty. I mean, surely data sovereignty is big for your clients, when you're talking about population data. The repeal of that and the closure of it suggests to me, is that a step backwards? Or is it just going to accelerate America and accelerate the development of AI in the US? Is it going to make it more appealing for companies to build products there?
I'm slightly cynical about it, and I'll tell you why. Because I don't think it makes much of a difference to what big tech is doing anyway. Let's be specific, right? That act was very much targeted at those that are building these mega foundation models, right? Or what are now called frontier models. The really big models, right? And if you think about it, there's two prevailing approaches to how you actually make these big models usable in the context of real life use cases. RAG is one we talked about, or train them with distinguished prompts, or train a small language model using that foundation model with distinguished prompts, right?
Yeah.
We can talk about that in a second, but specifically to your question, the reason I say it doesn't make a difference is because what that act gave in the recent past is for companies like the New York Times to discover that their data had already been used
Yes.
to train the LLM
I see.
and to then file a lawsuit,
Yeah.
right? So the act has been done.
Oh, they've either initiated litigation based on being in there or not.
It's so hard to figure out
Yes, I
that
see.
my data,
Yeah.
my personal data has been used to train this model, right? That it's always going to be an after the fact. It was never going to prevent big tech from doing it.
See, this is fascinating. In some, like, once you've published something, it's publicly available as far as I'm concerned. And you know,
This is what separates software companies like ours from big tech. And I'm proud of it. I'm proud to actually be working for a European software company, even though you will hear everywhere in the world about Europe is the bane of innovation these days and too restrictive, etc. And there is some truth to that.
Well, the EU
AI Act.
I got that one. The EU AI Act is driving for transformation.
Correct.
But if businesses have the ability to be global, does that just mean we're closing the doors to AI innovation in Europe? Because you're going to go to somewhere, I mean, I don't know where China sits with Deepseek, but I assume somewhere probably in between, or certainly on the side of...
China is far ahead from the US in terms of actually know that your information is monitored. I mean,
Of course.
Yeah, in China, it's kind of everybody works under the presumption that my data is not my data, right? It is monitored by the government. So that's why I say that I find that there is truth to the fact that because Europe is taking the higher standard, it's actually kind of reducing the ability to innovate much faster. So there is definitely truth to that argument.
I mean, I've started engaging a bit on the all parliamentary party groups advising AI on government. I've started the process of kind of engaging, and there is a perspective that the US are ahead, that the UK need to start thinking about things. It feels to me like China's in the blind spot. And when I look at the tools that I use around video generation, lip syncing, dubbing, like highly advanced technologies on not deep fake, but that type of technology, it's all out of China. And it feels to me like there needs to be a reordering of analyzing where the global players really are. Yeah, I think the car industry probably needs to do the same thing. The AI big tech certainly does, because I mean the technology is amazing. It's amazing.
So China, for the last 3 years, has been the biggest investor into research, whether it's life sciences, whether it's computer sciences, and I mean computer sciences more broadly, right? Software development, AI, etc. It has been by far. You look at the number of papers published by Chinese researchers. It's quantums.
Some of the stuff we were actually looking at something maybe 8-9 months ago, and I think it could have been around something that I enjoyed working on, which was crystalline fans in aeroplane engines, and all of the researchers were out of Asian educational facilities, and it was a fascinating document. It felt to me like, well, hang on, I would have expected that to come out of Massachusetts Institute of Technology or some sort of that's not happening. It doesn't seem
exactly. And the other thing, so I go back to kind of the question of the act, right? So the act was really targeted at these kind of big tech, right? And if you look at kind of what big tech is trying to do, is it's trying to build the foundation model, right? It's trying to build that foundational service. Why? Because that foundational service will then get consumed just like VMs are on cloud, just like storage is on cloud, right? So to me, we're playing different games. I'm not playing the game of being the hyperscaler. Yeah, I'm playing the game of enabling value to my industrial customers. And when I'm playing that game, I have to be super responsible. Even before AI came about, the fact that big tech didn't ask for any apology, but just introduced in their end user license agreements the fact that once you put your data on our platforms, it's ours. Right? This was commonplace, and it only got it kind of reversed when the GDPR Act came about and all of that good stuff. Right? We can't do that. I can't take my customers' data and just start training seed models, even though it may be non-confidential. Right? It may just be machine data. I still need to take permission from my customers to go like, can I take your machine data, which is highly non-confidential? It has no value to you other than the specific models, but actually it'll have ultimately great value to you if all of you 10 customers give me your machine data so I can train a seed model and I can give you back that model for you to get insight, not just based on your data, but also the 9 others, right? In a very kind of secure way, and nothing.
Well, you're taking a
leaked.
customer-first approach and orientating around their privacy and values,
Yes.
which is an extremely empathetic
Yes.
and good
Like
business.
I have models that are trainable, which means that we are effectively building the model.
Which is why we like RAG, really.
Yeah. And what we're saying is you choose to train the model, and when you hit a button, under the hood, you don't need to do anything. You just need to hit a button on the GUI. But when you hit that button, that model that we've built is going to be trained on only your data and be available to you for inference only for your purposes.
I want to ask about human in the loop. But before we get to that, you said something earlier which I didn't give you time to kind of talk about. You said there's a certain pride in being a part of a mature and successful European company, and I'd be interested to understand. You've been around 40 years. This is an evolution in IFS. This is a generational change in IFS, an evolution of its customers. Why that sense of pride?
I think that it is the balance of knowing that you're delivering value to customers and shouldering the responsibility of driving that innovation for customers in the right way. The fact that you're going to spend more time and resource in doing innovation with AI or software in general, because you then need to comply with regulations such as GDPR or the AI Act, to me is investment well made. Why? Because those are the type of customers we're dealing with. Those customers expect that, right? So you can go fast and break a few eggs and then have to invest that money anyway before customers actually accept what you're selling, or you can do that from the start, right? So as far as I'm concerned, actually we're building the right muscles from the very start. And you've worked in the technology domain long enough to know that refactoring and rewriting software, when you have to kind of introduce compliance with regulations like that could be a tedious job.
It's horrible,
right? So
It's
considering that
instant, huge technical debt,
exactly,
and the innovator's dilemma, which is the classic, where you're so heavily invested into what has instantly been made a legacy technology stack. Do you choose to keep that truck on the road,
correct,
or do you choose to try and evolve it and end up with some sort of hybrid? Or is there a need to say, look, we're going to emerge something net new?
So now, let me zoom this all the way back.
I don't think it needs to be all. You could be doing shoots of growth, net new use cases.
Exactly.
It doesn't need to be like, we're going to address this entire,
Yes. Let me now relate this. Let me zoom back out. Right? Let me relate this to the visible AI, I'll call it hype, right? That everybody in the world witnesses. Right? I'll give you 2 examples. OpenAI, which we talked about, right? ChatGPT, which everyone uses. And this is kind of the amalgamation of the real kind of talk of town, right? What big tech is driving. what is OpenAI trying to do? Is it really trying to come up with the next best, most intelligent model, or is it trying to serve its purpose of becoming the de facto search? You use it for search, because that's what it's really trying to do.
I think
It's trying to defeat Google at their game. You know why? Because Google, 90% plus of their revenues are ad. So you're telling me that when OpenAI achieves, search dominance, that you won't see ads there? Of course you would. That's the business model, right? But you see kind of OpenAI, right? Their target is actually to become the best. What is the difference between Yahoo or Alta Vista or Ask Jeeves or Dogpile and Google when Google came out? The simplicity of the UI
usability.
and the effectiveness of the software under the hood. Do you see resemblance between ChatGPT
Absolutely
and that?
do. I absolutely
Right?
do.
Now,
Absolutely do.
Now,
You can't underestimate Google, or the CEO was there with Donald Trump. The Gemini technology is coming on so quickly, and it's so impressive. And it's like Microsoft, Vaibs. In our probably more boring careers, Microsoft have been this master of taking customers who are spending loads of licenses on operating systems, turning that into application, the Office suite, turning that into Office 365 cloud services, turning the operating systems into Azure revenue. It's kind of been this master of client retention and evolution. ChatGPT and OpenAI have kind of come from nowhere into a highly fought space with one of the biggest tech companies, certainly in the Western world. I don't see Google letting that one go easily.
oh no. And if you think about it, right, each of these companies have chosen the lane they run in, right? I think AWS is a little bit of the running in everybody's lane a little bit, but Microsoft have always been in the enterprise lane. Google have always been in the research lane, but then ad and search is where they've really got their revenue from, right? And Microsoft was very intelligent, very quickly latched on to OpenAI as soon as it saw the opportunity, because they knew that doing this organically in house, it's not going to work, right? But now let me give you the Apple example, right? Why do you see so much of negativity around Apple's, the fact that it's summarizing the Gen AI based notifications? So it tends to do a pretty bad job, to the extent that that Apple in their latest update have kind of discontinued some of those summarizations that it's giving.
Fake news.
Correct. It's generating fake because it's summarizing to such a high level or so incorrectly that it's taking. So the feature effectively that Apple have is a killer feature, right? It basically looks at all your text that you're getting from a specific individual, and then the notifications that you get in your lock screen isn't the actual text that you've received. It's a summary of all the text that you've received. Very, very good for productivity, right? But it's doing it wrong, and that's why it's getting a lot of bad press. But the question that we need to think about is, why the heck is it getting bad press? Because it is used so pervasively.
Oh yeah.
Right? And that's what I want to kind of try and get across to you, is kind of big tech is playing it's playing the consumer game. It's playing the game of, search used by billions of internet users. It's playing the game of Android and iPhone devices used by millions
Consumer
of
control
users.
point. The
Consumer control point. And then what Microsoft is doing is, I run in the enterprise lane. I want to take that foundational technology and make it available to my enterprises. The game that I'm playing
at IFS,
I'm selling to industrial customers. I'm selling to a completely different paradigm than consumer. And what I'm trying to do is, I'm trying to make that experience consumer grade, right? I'm trying to get them searchability across the product. I'm trying to get them notifications that are intelligent as well. But I'm having to hold myself to a much, much higher bar, right, of data security, privacy, confidentiality.
Look, one thing we haven't touched on is this augmentation of the frontline worker.
Yeah.
And it's becoming hugely apparent to me, certainly with some of the public sector work I've been doing, the augmentation of NHS frontline workers, mental health workers, to summarize discussions to give them time back to do more. This is not about replacing them. They're huge. Like, I had this theory, this very black and white view that are these people going to be replaced, or but the reality is the workload is so immense that even with augmentation, a lot of the NHS, they're not going to get their day's work done in a day's work. So when we look at your clients, whether it's engineers, people hanging off pylons, working on pipelines in industrial manufacturing, people at the front line, there's got to be some form of generative AI augmentation for them, whether it be safety, guidance, in training, augmentation in their jobs, multilingual. I just see Vaibs that as a huge play built on their own data, not a general purpose thing they're going to share with others because it's competitive advantage, right?
Massive. It's massive. The opportunity. I mean, I can give you lists of different domains of capabilities, and we'll probably get into that a little bit. But I think if you look at kind of the opportunity of, or no, let's say, if you look at philosophically the argument between replacing humans versus augmenting humans, right? This is where I kind of started with. I'll probably land on the pragmatic side of it, because I'm a big believer in the fact that when the complex of today gets solved by technology, we will move on to the next frontier of complexity.
Yeah.
Right? And so what Gen AI is very good at today is to solve the mundanity in my work. And the more I get productive, the more I will then get trained, and as communities of intelligent workers, we will find the next level of complexity to work on. That doesn't mean that certain people will lose their jobs. I think that people will. I think that some people will not be able to cope with the advancement in technology. And those are generally the kind of people that don't embrace technology at the outset. So if you're not understanding what generative AI is, if you don't know firsthand what it's capable of, what it's not capable of, you're behind today. That's a big risk. And there are people like that. I asked you the question about, do you use Gen AI or Google? If I walked out on the street and I asked a random sample of 10 people, 100 people, I could guarantee you that 80 to 90% of them don't use ChatGPT that frequently at all.
But I think that the bell curve is moving quite quickly.
That's right where I started from. Is kind of, it takes years for that to happen, and in this many years, what you're going to see is augmentation. Now, if I get more specific about kind of the augmentation that our customers are looking for, you look at the service worker, right? All the way from AI, which, by the way, the AI that we have is the best in the world, hands down. There is nothing better that can take very, very big teams of field workers and optimize their schedules for travel time, sustainability, the right skills, a whole bunch of different constraints. But we have the best scheduling optimization. Now you start there. You then have generative AI, which can very quickly plan that field worker's day. Yeah, it can very easily go into those very complex maintenance manuals, which a lot of our customers store in our document storage, and start to summarize them. Right? It can start to prepare that person with the customer interaction history that's stored in our system. When the person goes on site, it can start to summarize those complex maintenance tasks into simple steps, right? So you have an aging workforce. We are now starting to bring in new youth, and you have to train them very quickly. Are you going to get them to read the 600-page manual, or are you just going to get them to go and use generative AI to assist before they become experts through experiential learning?
Vaibs, that trajectory of discussion is for another time, but it totally impacts on the structure of education and training. The idea of traditional training models in education and schooling, I believe, is about to go through a huge transformation. Because your point there, a AI built customized set of instructions or guidance or augmentation is prepared in real time. But it's back to this original point that humans learn through progressive experience. If you're not giving somebody the ability to have progressive experience and give them the very focused, AI-driven custom workflow, are they themselves going to lose something?
I really like that that argument, because what comes to my mind is, I don't know whether you had this in school, but when I was in school, I loved doing an audio video and AV lesson to learn a subject matter, or to go out in the field and be taught the foundational principles that I was being taught by seeing the real world, than learning it from a textbook. So I think that the way we learn has to do with both the experience that we go through in learning the fundamentals, and then the hierarchy of learning that we achieve, which is the fundamentals to begin with, the more advanced concepts on top of those fundamentals. The latter, I think, is never going to change. Yeah, which is why if you start to now use Gen AI to solve math problems at school, you're taking shortcuts. You need to understand those theorems and corollaries that you were taught when you were a young student, because that's foundational. But your ability to be taught those in an experiential way is where things will stick, rather than a textbook and a notepad where you practice, right? Using experience. And so I think that's where Gen AI can be super useful, right? Like if I'm a maintenance worker and I can get Gen AI to help me fix that valve in the pump, the fifth time I'll know how to do it myself.
I see.
Right? And by the way, I will learn about some of the fundamentals of valve and one-way flow and pressure and all of that just by fixing that thing, right?
So it is still a learning tool. Fundamentally, the
so.
human becomes independent of the education or instruction.
Yes.
It just accelerates the learning process. It makes the learning process more of as opposed to getting an awareness of everything, and then when you need, you draw from that. You're getting information at the point in time, then you build knowledge through experience.
Correct.
But then you need to handle the whole anxiety of a new problem. Because if you have somebody who has the whole knowledge, they're not going to, it's pump 4, 5, they're going to just go for it. What you somehow need to handle the issue of, okay, when it's somebody doing that pump for the first time, are they going to be confident enough to say, I've never done it before, but I've got my AI augmentation tool, I'm going to do it. Once they've done it, then it's rinse and repeat kind of thing.
Exactly. So it's kind of that assistant, right? It's almost like what recipes are to cooking.
Yeah, once you've done it a few times, you probably can crack the eggs, throw the flour in, do whatever.
Eventually, kind of, when you've cooked enough times, and it's not 10 times or 30 times, it's over a period of a couple of years, you start to understand the fundamentals of, I need to add salt because, that seasoning gives flavor, right? Or enhances flavor. I need to add fat because fat is a good carrier of flavor. But all of those kind of fundamental concepts of cooking, right? I need to apply heat at the right time, the right amount, right?
So as we kind of, bring this to this practical thing, all of this knowledge that you have, what's your advice to a CIO or a head of manufacturing, a head of somewhere where they have data? What would you be telling them to think about in terms of maybe a first AI project or a first step into this world where value could be seen and demonstrated to kind of the business?
It always begins with the use case. Always begins with, who is the human that we want to make productive? Or what is the business process that you want to automate? It has to start there. And I think very quickly, it should then become about, okay, where's the data that supports that? Right? The reality is, CIOs and all of our customers, most companies, right, they are dealing with the data problem. Because the AI innovation, if they don't have the capability to harness that AI innovation in-house, there's more than enough innovation and kind of players in the market that could deliver it. It's the data that's very home to that particular company, and how that data is stored, how it traverses from one system to another, and how multiple systems and the orchestration of data flow between these systems translates into a business process. Yeah, the and now I'm speaking like an architect, but like this has nothing to do with AI. Albeit AI is reliant on data as well. We keep saying data is an asset, right? But then the first thing that you see every company do is actually take integration and think that buying an integration platform is going to magically solve my data problem. Yeah. You could go buy all the capability of business processes from different systems, right? You could buy our suite of software, which will cater to the vast majority of your corporate and industrial capabilities. But if you don't invest in that integration across the landscape of systems you have, and you don't treat that as a strategic differentiator, and get a set of people, a team of people that can understand those data flows and that can harness the power of that data, you won't be able to do anything material, including AI. Or you will struggle to achieve value from AI at scale. Yeah, you'll be able to do kind of point solutions and solve use case 1 and 2 and 3, but when it comes to actually doing this pervasively across the board, it'd be too big an investment. And the first thing you want to fix is exactly that integration problem.
Vaibs, our conversation has given me this sense of you're bringing academic and deep knowledge within these technologies to very practical, value-orientated use cases in real business that's making the world work. The importance of your thinking and philosophies and application is so important. It's going to affect us all in the way these businesses and systems and governments and processes leverage AI. It's been an absolute pleasure. We've talked in detail about data, about global dominance and shifts in policy and governance and sovereignty and social awareness. We've talked through the dominance of consumer-grade experience and how that's absolutely proliferating through everyone in many use cases within their lives, but also how using technologies like RAG can really enhance customer-specific or business-specific problems. With everything that's gone on in the last 48 hours, from Donald Trump drill baby drill to the huge investment in AI infrastructure, do you believe AI will take humanity to a utopia or dystopia?
Utopia, 10 out of 10 times. I think technology in general, including this new technology wave that you see, is going to be a utopian future. That doesn't mean that we're not going to have bumps. I think we're going to have many more bumps en route. But I think it is going to make all of us much, much more capable and productive. I don't think it will replace humans. Of course, I don't think so. I think we humans, like I said, will find the next frontier of complexity. I mean, think about it, right? Space. It's a completely unexplored territory. And I love the fact that that's becoming more and more front and center, right? You're starting to see, institutions beyond NASA and some of the government institutions actually starting to foray into space. I think that's the next frontier, right? Those are the kind of things that we're going to start to get more fascinated about. And we'll only be able to do that when some of our earthly problems can be solved by technology, right? I will also address the AGI and ASI question. We talked about the fact that AGI actually was a term coined in the mid-2010s, right? I think 2015 or 2016. And in fact, actually, if I remember correctly, the prediction that time was that we would achieve singularity in 2025. And to be honest, we may. I don't think we'll ever remember that moment. I think that I'll explain it with two facets. We keep saying AI, but I don't think or I think we've forgotten, and we don't really appreciate the A of AI. We keep obsessing about the intelligence of it, but we actually forget the fact that it's artificial, right? It is meant to be by nature artificial. So when LLMs respond to you in very, very capable English language, that doesn't mean that they understand language, right? That just means that they're sophisticated enough to produce human-like language to convince you of intelligence, right? So I think AGI is actually a bit of an oxymoron. No matter what test you give me that proves that AGI is intelligent, of course it is. Computer systems are meant to be because they're codified and built by very intelligent human beings, right? So I think that artificial part is one that we need to kind of pay more attention to. The other paradigm or dimension with which I'll explain this is intelligence is always a combination, at least from a human perspective, of IQ and EQ. And I think that AI and AI native systems are going to be the highest IQ systems, beyond the capacity of any human being. They already are. And you can tell me how you can achieve EQ with image recognition and all kinds of cameras doing nonverbal or looking for nonverbal cues. But I can tell you, sitting in the room here, I pick up just very naturally these cues from speaking with you, where I know whether you're comfortable, you're agreeing with me on something, or disagreeing. Where you can make a disagreeing face, but I will still know that you're actually doing it in a sarcastic way, right? That's EQ. And I don't know when AI will get EQ. I don't know if AI will get EQ. Yeah, because EQ is very hard to codify. So I don't really think about AGI as much. What I think about is the capability of AI, Gen AI included, to be able to help solve human problems. Yeah, whether those are fundamental human problems of, the next frontier we talked about, space, whether it's, finding cure to diseases, whether it's helping our industrial customers derive more value from their operations, keep their machines up. And those are things that really, really excite me, and how AI can help there. I think we as a race will be just fine.